Are you feeling unsure of whether an e-reader is worth it or if physical books are just superior? Hopefully I can help you with that. So a couple months ago, I talked about trying an e-reader for the very first time. I purchased my Books Go 6 and used this over the past couple of months, read several books with it, and in that time I have come up with a couple of opinions about e-readers and some pros and cons. So I thought it would be helpful to sort of discuss some of those pros and cons and see if we can't come to a conclusion or at least help inform your choice of whether or not you want to purchase an e-reader. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so I want to start off by talking a little bit about why I purchased an e-reader and what I use my e-reader for, because I think everyone's a little different in how they use their e-reader or how they read, and I just wanted to share a little bit about how I use it. So I obviously have quite a few books. I have quite a collection of books, and I have always been a fan of reading books physically if I'm going to be reading with my eyes, or I like to use an audiobook, which I still use my phone for that, and I just use Libby on my phone. So if I'm physically wanting to read a book with my eyes, I tend to pick up a physical book. And for me, this is a combination of library books and books that I purchase. So, and this is totally just a personal thing of how you use your books versus an e-reader. For me, I don't use my e-reader for books that I purchase. So essentially, if I want to read a physical book, I will either check it out at the library if it is available at the library, or I will purchase it and put it on my shelf as a decorative object. Whereas with my e-reader, this is just how I personally use an e-reader. I only use my e-reader for ebooks that I can download for free on Libby. Now, what I don't want to do is assume that I know that an e-reader or physical books are better for every single person. I think everyone has different needs with their readership and different wants from their reading experience. So this is very much just my opinion in terms of what I value about books versus an e-reader and what my experience has been like. But I hope that I'm able to touch on a lot of the main concepts and issues that we all are sort of considering when we're looking into getting an e-reader or getting physical books. So I'm hoping that this will be helpful in a broader sense, but it is also just my experience with an e-reader and physical books. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is access to library books. So for me personally, this is a little bit of a layered conversation because it really depends on what e-reader you purchase. So in my experience, the books e-readers are very, very easy to install library apps onto. If you are someone who wants to use an e-reader for the library exclusively, or even just some of the time, there are some e-readers that are easier than others to access library books on. So the Books branded e-readers are all very, very easy because you're basically just downloading an app onto this device. It has an Android operating system, so you can just download an app and use it as you would generally on another device. Whereas with some other e-readers, you may have to sort of hack the system to download your library books onto it. It's a little bit more complicated. So it just depends on what type of e-reader you're looking for. And for library integration, I think that these are superior, honestly. But if library is not your number one concern, then this specific brand may not be the best choice for you, though I have been very, very happy with it. But this is less about brand and more so about libraries. So if you are a heavy library user like I am, I use the library for both physical books and for ebooks, as well as for audiobooks. And something to consider when you're deciding on whether you want to invest in an e-reader or read physical books only, I would think about how much you use the library and what you have access to in your library system. So what I would do is see what resources your library has. If your library has something like Libby where you can download that app, I would definitely, before you purchase anything, go on that app and sign up for that on your phone or any device that you already have. And then you can essentially look from there whether there are lots of ebooks that you're going to be able to put on hold or just borrow right away. If you have a lot of access to the types of books that you're interested in, that might be a great resource for you. And then I would also look at whether or not your physical library location and the surrounding libraries that you can get books in from, if they have the type of books that you're looking for. And then I would also look at your physical library and see if they have a lot of books that you're interested in and whether you can get holds placed and have them sent to your library of a lot of books that you're interested in. So for me personally, I live in a small town and my library doesn't have a whole lot of these really niche books that I really enjoy, or a lot of weird women lit or horror. They just don't have a lot of the books that I'm interested in, especially with like indie publishers and things like that. So if I want to use the library, it behooves me to use Libby because I actually have access to a whole lot more books through multiple library cards using Libby versus just going to my local library. So your library may offer more books or more books that you're interested in on Libby than they do actually in person. I would do some research on what is available, and if you feel like there are a lot more ebooks available to you than what you can get at your physical library, I would consider getting an e-reader. Now, as a side note, you can read your ebooks on your phone or other device that's not an e-ink display. But if you're already considering getting an e-reader, you understand why, e-readers can be helpful in terms of the display and it looking more like an actual page and being less stressful on your eyes. So those are the reasons why you might want to get an e-reader versus reading an ebook on your phone or something like that. If your top consideration is library access and free access to books, those are kind of the considerations that would come up for me. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about when we're considering whether e-readers or physical books are better for you personally is this idea of the use of space and the risk of purchase. So what I mean by that is if you're working with limited space, buying physical books takes up a lot more space. Now, obviously, we can have a conversation about digital space and how much digital media you can have on a particular device with the space allotted to you. But if we're just speaking about physical space, this takes up a lot less room than all of these books do. And technically, I could have quite a few books on this device to the point where I could clear out a majority of my shelf and still have room on this device. So I could, in theory, have just this and no physical books at all if I was really concerned about minimalism or reducing space used in my home. So assuming that you're actually purchasing ebooks, there also can be less of a risk involved in purchasing an ebook versus a physical book. So not only is it reducing space that you're using by purchasing an ebook, but sometimes ebooks are a lot cheaper than a physical book would be. So you're also reducing the risk of having this item that you're putting on your shelf that you're keeping and owning that you may not actually like. And at that point, it just feels like you're taking up space versus with an e-reader, you wouldn't necessarily feel like, oh, I'm taking up all of this space and I've spent all this money on something I don't like. There's a possibility that the risk involved could feel lower because of this space that the book or ebook takes up. So for me, that sort of looks like purchasing less books physically now that I have my e-reader, because if I can access it for free or for a lower cost, I almost prefer to try it out and read the book without purchasing it physically, because then I would know whether or not I like it. And if I really, really love a book and I want it to be part of my physical collection later, then I can add that to my collection. But there's less risk involved than spending $17 on a paperback or $30 on a brand new hardcover just to maybe not like a book. So this idea of space and risk is also very personal. Again, I think that these are just more points to consider rather than a yes or no either way. I think that what I have come to personally in terms of space and risk, like I said, is I would rather get a free ebook or a lower cost ebook if it's a book that I'm not sure about. That way I can reduce the risk of spending extra money and taking up space. But I also do unhaul books frequently enough that I do tend to have room on my shelves to continue buying books. Obviously, there comes a point where it's not financially or space-wise sustainable to keep adding books to your collection. So those are all things to consider. But I think for me personally, I think that it is helpful to have an e-reader to reduce the space and risk, but it doesn't completely eliminate my book buying. That may also look different for you if you just prefer reducing the amount of stuff that is in your home. An e-reader may be perfect for you. If you like having physical items on your shelf and to display, and that is a goal of yours within your reading and book collecting life, then books might be better for you. So this perfectly leads into the conversation about the tactile experience of a book and the idea of collectability. So physical books just have something special about them. I love to feel the pages. I love the experience of opening up a book and getting to tactilely turn the pages. I like the smell of books. I like the feel of books. There are so many things to love about a physical book. And it is true in my experience that you just can't beat that tactile sensation of reading a physical book versus reading on an e-reader. So if that is a big part of your reading life, that you just love the feel and experience of a book, then e-readers may not be as great of a choice for you. For me, I think I tend to prioritize my physical books over ebooks because I just have more fun with the experience of reading a physical book, and I'm okay with that. But going back to what I was saying about space and displaying, I think that people online talk about how buying books, collecting books, and reading are different hobbies. And I don't know that that is 100% true, that they're completely different hobbies, but I do understand the point of collecting is different than just reading, because at this point, a lot of us have access to libraries or can find books for, very cheap at a thrift store. If we're just interested in reading something that interests us, we could find something that would be a lot cheaper or for free at the library. But if you're someone who loves owning objects that you love, if you want to be a collector of books, if you want to hold the books, that just can't be replicated from purchasing or having ebooks. It's just not the same sensation as looking at your shelves and thinking, wow, I have all of these books and I get to look at them, I get to touch them, I get to take them out and feel them. It is a very different experience than just reading. So again, if you're someone who is into books and also into collecting books at the same time, it just doesn't feel the same collecting ebooks. Another thing that's great about physical books is the lendability of physical books. If you want to share a book with someone and you own it, you are able to lend that to somebody and share the book with them. If you have an ebook, you can't really share the ebook as easily. You may be able to share the device with that person. I know sometimes you can share books on e-readers, but it isn't always an option. Whereas if you have a physical book, you can just provide the physical book to someone and they can enjoy the book as well. Okay, so moving right along, I want to talk a little bit about ownership in the digital age. So in our digital era, a lot of the things that we have purchased and we believe that we own, we don't actually own. We only have a license to view it. And unfortunately, it wouldn't be very difficult for those things to be removed. For example, if you've purchased a movie through a streaming service, that movie could be taken off because of licensing or whatnot. They could pull that movie from your collection and then you just don't have access to this thing that you purchased. It's also possible that you can own an ebook and the platform that you own it on can actually come in and change what the ebook says. Now, this may be as innocuous as a misprint, or it could be something nefarious. Ultimately, the idea of a company coming in and changing a book that you own is scary. There's a lot of conversation about censorship and access to books over time and what we will will and won't have access to. There was even a big push recently for people to go out and buy certain classics that have been banned and have been contested so that you physically own them in case they disappear. So to me, ownership is a big part of this conversation. So I think that there's a case for purchasing books that are contested that may or may not disappear someday, but also for supporting authors and supporting independent bookstores. Because if we're not putting our money towards, independent bookstores and trying to keep those places alive, we will lose the community, and we'll also lose any competitor to essentially Amazon, who has taken over all these different book spaces, and we're going to lose those other options to purchase books from. So it is important right now, if it's possible and you have the means to purchase a book that you love, it's really important to support authors and to support independent bookstores, because we don't know if we're going to lose ownership over those things. And to me, it feels vital to purchase books that mean a lot to you so that you don't lose them one day, and to show support to those people. And again, this is all dependent on what you have the means to do. Please also use your library before you do any purchasing. Libraries are also something that we could lose. So it's so imperative that you get a library card if you have access to a library, and use the library as a resource for not only books, but for community and for programs. Libraries have so much to offer. So it's very important that you support your local library if you can. But beyond that, supporting independent bookstores and authors is also very important for our current publishing industry, and to fight against these huge companies who are monopolizing publishing and bookselling. I know that was a bit of a soapbox, but I think that it's really important, and it's an important conversation when we're considering whether we should be investing in physical books or whether we should be investing in ebooks and an e-reader. So all of these things are sort of interconnected, so I'm just gonna flow right into the next topic, which is ease of use and reading. So first, we're just gonna talk a little bit about ease of use and reading in general, and then we'll go specifically into portability and travel, because it is sort of two different things. So when it comes to ease of reading, I do think that the e-reader has more options and can be tailored more so to your needs. So what I mean by that is, typically a book, unless you're getting it large print, for example, you can't change the size of the font, you can't change how zoomed in it is, you can't change any of those things. So for example, if it's a book that just has a very small font and you're having trouble reading it, there's nothing you can do about that. Versus with an e-reader, you can typically change how big the text is on the page, and in that way it's a little bit more accessible if you are not able to read small type. And even if you are able to read small type, it still might be more comfortable to read larger type. Also, e-readers have brightness settings, so you can read in the dark, you can read in different lighting conditions, and you can adjust the brightness based on your needs. So speaking specifically about accessibility with physical books versus ebooks, I read this book, Hunchback by Sayo Ichikawa. Obviously it's a physical book, but in the book, the main character is disabled, and there is a passage where she talks about how other readers basically say, oh my gosh, I love the tactile sensation of reading a book. I don't know how people don't want to read a physical book. It's so much better. And she is sort of saying how ableist that is and how inconsiderate that is of people who it is painful to hold a physical book and to turn pages. And that just made me think really hard about the accessibility of physical books, because I even have issues with my hands. I have chronic pain, and my wrists can get really sore and tired from holding up a big book. For me, it even hurts to hold a large hardcover for quite a long time. And I know that there are so many people who have similar issues or struggle to hold a book for a long period of time or have mobility limitations. And so an ebook can be a really good resource for that. You're able to just tap the screen to turn pages. They also sell things like remotes that'll help you turn a page. You're able to prop the e-reader up easier because it's not just going to slam closed. It just makes it easier on your eyes, on your hands. And so if accessibility is something that you are concerned with and require, I think that e-readers kind of have a leg up on physical books because it is more customizable and you have the ability to not have to hold a heavy book in your hands. The only other thing to consider when it comes to use and ease of use is the fact that you have to charge an e-reader. So most e-readers have quite a long battery life. If you're someone who struggles to remember to plug things in and charge them, it could be kind of more of a struggle than just grabbing a book and throwing that in your bag because, you know, a book is always going to be ready to go and ready to read. So you don't necessarily have to think about charging that. And you also don't have to think as hard about damaging it. I mean, personally, I think a lot about damaging it because I'm like very pristine with my books, but you don't have to worry about cracking a screen. You don't have to worry about getting a screen protector. You can just throw a book in a bag and not worry about, you know, whether it's going to get damaged or anything like that. Also, some e-readers are, you know, susceptible to water damage, some aren't. So that's another thing to consider when you're picking an e-reader if you want to get an e-reader. But yeah, I would just think about whether you feel like you'll remember to charge an e-reader frequently enough, but most e-readers last for quite a long time between charges. Okay, so the next part of ease of use that I wanted to talk about was portability and travel. So I do think e-readers kind of have a leg up in this category. Obviously, very small, very compact. Some of them can fit in your pocket, but they very easily can fit into pockets of, you know, a bag or something like that. I think that they are great for travel because you can just stick them wherever and they are not usually very heavy, so it doesn't add weight to a bag. And if you're traveling somewhere for a long time, you may want to bring more than one book. So having the ability to download multiple books onto that small device and only have to carry that small device versus carrying, you know, several physical books. Obviously that would change your weight limit on a plane or something like that, or just if you're carrying something on, you know, your shoulders or you're carrying a bag with you, it's going to be a lot lighter for you to carry an e-reader versus to carry multiple books around. So I do think that e-readers do give a little bit of a leg up on portability and travel. That is my primary use case of my e-reader. Occasionally I do read on my e-reader at home, but because I have a whole lot of physical books to read, and I'm also working on TBR Takedown where I read all of my physical books, I haven't been prioritizing reading ebooks at home. However, I'm going on a trip shortly and I'm planning on bringing my e-reader so that I don't have to bring more than one physical book. I'm still bringing one physical book, but I will have access to multiple other ebooks that I will be able to read on my trip without having to bring a ton of books with me. Okay, so those were all of the points that I had to talk about today with e-readers versus physical books. And I think that ultimately what I want you to take from this video is that it is a very personal decision about which you prefer, but I hope that this was a little bit more of a comprehensive look of the different aspects to consider when deciding whether you want to purchase an ebook or continue reading on physical books. Ultimately, there is not a right and a wrong answer. I think it's just different for everyone, but I hope this was helpful to make a decision that works best for you. My conclusion is that I like both for different reasons. I think that it is great to have both as an option if you're able to do that. I think if you had to choose one or the other, I would still choose physical books from a pleasure experience of reading and collecting and owning these books, being able to lend them to friends, all the things that we talked about that come with physical books. But if you have the ability to have an e-reader and read physical books, whether you purchase them or read them from the library, both have unique features and experiences that are better than the other. And I think that they're great tools to use together so that you can have the most access to reading as possible. And that's the goal, right? To be able to give lots of different options and resources so that you are able to read. So I hope that video was helpful. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.